Hello everyone. Welcome to this special program on the pre-budget analysis. My name is Ruziga Emmanuel and I'm humbly having here the guest who is Musinguzi Angelo, Manager Tax Services at KPMG. And we have also Mr. Maurice Toroitich, the country director or managing director of KCB Rwanda. Welcome, my guests.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we are going to discuss about the budget, which is in about 24 hours from now. It's going to be presented by the Minister of Finance, Gatete Clever, and of course in the East African countries, except Burundi, of course, ministers of finance in those countries are going to present at the same time the budgets of their countries. What are we expecting, Mr. Toroitich?
Thank you very much. I think the important thing to note is that, of course, we already have hints from the budget framework on what we are likely to be seeing in the budget that is going to be read tomorrow by the Minister of Finance. The thing to mention from my point of view is that I should expect continuity in terms of the budget framework to be able to sustain the work that has already begun towards actualization of EDPRS objectives and Vision 2020. So continuity and sustainability of the objectives and the activities that already began in the previous years towards actualization of that is what I should expect.
Yes, let's come back to Mr. Angelo. I think you have an idea of where we should expect that this money is going to be allocated more. And I mean, which sector do you think?
Thank you. Angelo, as you rightly said, is my name. I work with KPMG. KPMG is a global network of independent auditors, and we do audit, tax, and advisory services. Back to the budget, Rwanda is striving toward self-sustainability, and I expect more resource envelope to be allocated to areas like energy, agriculture, and infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, what do you think is going to be the portion of the money from domestic collections?
I think the minister in the past has indicated that, and this is very much in line with the aspirations of Rwanda, in the context of self-reliance, that more and more we should be seeing the financing of the budget from domestic resources. We are not yet at the point where we can entirely say that our budget is going to be funded entirely, through domestic revenue. But I think, those steps that the country has already begun to take towards actualizing that dream, is something that we can already begin to see in the way that the budgets are being formulated and in the way that the budgets are being actualized on a year-to-year basis. So my sense is that domestic resources will begin to account for more and more of the budget going forward. In terms of specifics, my sense is that we should actually begin to see the domestic revenue going closer towards the 70-80% level level going forward.
Mm-hmm. And is this attitude going to be seen in the countries in the region also? Because we see this in Rwanda, because maybe in 2012 and 2013 we encountered some problems with the donors. Do we see this attitude in the region also?
I think it's a matter of resolve and really what the people of East Africa believe they can do for themselves. If I use the example of Kenya, which I am familiar with, for a much longer time, in the early 90s, there was a very high level of reliance on donor funding for budget support. But, that came to a crunch, in the 90s, when donor funding, suddenly became unavailable. And, there was a certain level of resolve, in that country that, notwithstanding what has happened, Kenya must go on. And I think what we are seeing in Rwanda today is almost a replica of that, to say, yes, we've run into challenges, with certain funding sources, but that doesn't mean that Rwanda cannot continue operating. And therefore, to me, I think it's a matter of resolve, it's a matter of commitment, it's a matter of hard work, and therefore, In fact, I think it's our duty to ensure that more and more of our funding resources are actually being generated domestically, rather than continuing to look over our shoulders to see whether we can get, more and more money from other people. Of course, that does not suggest that we are not going to work with partners. Of course, in this world, you cannot do everything alone. You need like-minded partners, and I believe that is the path that this country is going to take. Working with like-minded partners to support the core efforts of the people of Rwanda to fund and support its development agenda.
Mr. Musinguzi, the budget of Rwanda, the revenues of Rwanda are just taking 15.4% of the GDP of the country. Can you say this self-reliance on domestic revenues, is it going to work in this country?
Thank you. It's working actually, because when you look at, for example, last budget, see more than 60% was from domestic revenue, and taxes account for more than 50%. Basically, this means that even without foreign grants or donations, the country can operate very effectively. Although there is that gap, as my colleague said, which needs also to be filled. But when you look at the past, the history and so on, the trend is that in future, Rwanda will be self-sustaining. It will be running. The informal sector is getting narrow and narrow. So this basically means that the foreign dependence is reducing, and the local funding is increasing. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if we talk about this percentage of the revenues in relation to the GDP, we also think of that self-reliance in general. That maybe we need to do something on these tactics and techniques of collecting revenues. What do you think is missing in these techniques so that we get where we want to be? Mr. Angelo.
The challenge I see is that the informal sector is still wide. What has to be done is to increase the tax base so that everyone is brought into the tax net and they pay taxes appropriately. And again, the financial inclusion, people accessing finance and investing in activities that generate revenue and pay taxes, and then domestic revenue will increase.
Yes, let's go to Mr. Torre Tichu and the financial sector, of course, and then the KCB, the bank you had, and other banks in this industry. What do you think should be done in this budget to make sure that this financial sector is working properly? Because we have seen a number of complaints about mostly the interest rates. What do you think should be done in this budget to make sure that this financial sector is improving year and year?
I think it's quite obvious that the development of the private sector, as the engine of growth of an economy, is very much reliant on the efficiency and the health of the financial system, in a particular economy, and I don't think Rwanda is any exception. And so, two things from me is that, one, government policy that we already see, and we see that in the way that government is pursuing the monetary and fiscal policy, enabling the financial system to retain resources to be able to lend, and provide credit to the private sector as a means of supporting the private sector to be able to begin to contribute in a much more meaningful way to the economic agenda of the country. I think the minister in his budget framework, begins to paint a picture of the long-term road, down the road that, we need to begin to see the private sector playing a much more active role and actually beginning to take the lead in driving investment and economic growth, unlike the public sector growth agenda that we have seen over the years. Now, for that to happen, what it means is that access to finance, has got to be efficient. And secondly, the stability and the operating environment of the banking sector has got to be such that it is able to sustain the banks themselves, because banks themselves are businesses, and therefore, things that we can do from a legal perspective to ensure that, when banks lend money to the private sector, that money is used for productive purposes. But if for one reason or another, which often happens, that money is not able to be repaid back, that the financial system is actually able to find a means of getting back that value, because that is important for sustainability of the banks themselves. Now, the second part, of course, is the demand side of the financial services, in the sense that when you begin to do things in the economy that encourages, the private sector, individuals and corporate entities to be able to be productive, and generate value, or then that feeds into the banking system in terms of cash flow, in terms of revenue, in terms of income, and then it begins to become a self-sustaining momentum of sort, and so I think making sure that we have tight-lipped, legal and regulatory framework to support the growth and
what is the role? What is the role of the financial sector players here? Because I don't see them doing something. Because you are talking about the government doing something so that the private sector works. And what is the role of the financial institutions to make sure that this sector is also developing?
I think the point I was trying to make is that the financial sector is part of the ecosystem. And so it's like a wheel, and all the wheels of the ecosystem must be moving. So on the one part, government is playing its role. The financial system is playing its role in whatever little means that it is able to do today. But I think that can actually be improved and oiled and facilitated to generate more momentum. And that means, feeding more production into the system. It means creating more efficiency in the way that the financial system operates, and the way that the key actors in the financial system interact with one another. I think that's an important point.
Mr. Angelo Musinguzi, you have another way of looking at this thing. Do you have maybe another way which is maybe different on the way he's mentioning?
Not much different, but what I can add is that financial inclusion, we need also to look at areas like capital markets, whereby people can access finance, investment, and even the local people can invest their digital money on capital markets. We are not looking at the banks only. We're also looking at the circles. We're looking at cooperatives. We are looking at capital markets, and so on. So, but when you look at our financial system as it is today, a lot has been done. And now people can access finance through different areas, through banks, through capital markets, through microfinance institutions, and so on.
So about the concern which is being put forward by the clients of the banks, do you hear that concern? Maybe on the interest rates, and your institution is doing the consultancy to most of these institutions, including the KCB, of course. I think it should be.
Yes, we do.
Yes. Now, do we say that maybe this is the result of your ideas and advice you give them as the way the industry is functioning right now?
It's functioning. Of course, people are saying that the interest rate are still high, and we wish it can come down. But this again depends on some factors, depends on the cost of business. When we look at the repo rate of the central bank, I guess it's also a factor that feeds into the banking industry rates.
Yes. Which of course should be related to the budget of which is going to be presented. We expect that maybe, as you said, agricultural sector and infrastructure sector. Then do we see the access to money from these institutions to make sure that the projects in these sectors are developing, Mr. Toroitich?
Well, I think the way to put these clearly is that the financial system does not exist in isolation. The financial system is a result of the economic activity that takes place in the economy. So for the financial system to grow stronger, and as Angelo said here, the financial system here is not just the banks. It includes the insurance companies and any other form of financial institution that we are dealing with. Is that it's a facilitator of economic activity. So the environment in which the economic activity is taking place is what government is looking to strengthen through its expenditure programs. The building of infrastructure, the development of energy resources, the creation of the legal frameworks to facilitate, entry and operation of business in the country. These are all attractions that the country needs in the first instance, in order for that to begin to feed into the financial system. But that is not to say that the financial system has to wait until all that happens. It is like I said, it's a self-sustaining machine, in the sense that we already have financial resources in the system that may or may not be equal to the size of our economy, but then how do we get more of those resources into the financial system so that this begins to fuel a greater economic activity, providing more resources for the farmers, for the SMEs, for the corporate entities, to begin playing their role, which government today is playing more in terms of investment into the economy. I think that's really the core of what I would expect, future government expenditure programs and policy directions to begin to unbundle and give, the right direction.
Maybe we are going to come back on that if we get that time. But then let us discuss about the budget in East Africa. As we said in area that the budget is going to be as Gatete is going to be presenting the budget in Rwanda, in Kenya also, in Uganda, and in Tanzania. We expect the same thing to be done at the same moment. And then one would ask you, maybe, do you think that maybe the focus in Rwanda here is going to be the focus in Tanzania, is going to be the focus in Kenya on the budget in the sector?
I think broadly, yes. And my expectation is that infrastructure is going to take center stage. And this has been
Why?
Because again, going back to what I said, it is a foundation upon which economic growth will happen. So when you have infrastructure, which is your road network, your railway network, power, that is the engine that fires economic activity. And so I don't see any difference in that expectation in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Burundi and Rwanda. Now, in the spirit, and we have seen these promulgated and, actively, spoken about by our leaders, is that these are the core of the things that, our leaders are actually going to be looking at. And if you speak specifically about the Northern Corridor, it's about infrastructure. And once infrastructure is in place, then there's movement of goods, the reduction in time and cost. And that, in my view, should then be able to promote not just the growth of the individual economies of the region, but actually the region, entirely as a whole.
That is the focus, and then let us go back to the monetary policy, because in last few months we've seen the devaluation of the currencies in this region in a way we can say very terrible. Yeah? Then over the last decade, inflation targeting has become the predominant monetary policy in Rwanda and also in Tanzania, and Kenya and Uganda. But then we are seeing this happening, and then we are asking ourselves: is the way of dealing with monetary policy, is it dealing only with inflation, or we can have another approach which is going to function, and then we see our currencies work well and then have the value in relation to the dollar? Mr.
Yeah, yes, inflation is a key factor when it comes to monetary policy in Rwanda, and because it affects all the other sectors. However, there are some other monetary policy instruments which the country cannot drop. For example, when we talk about interest rates, as you said, we talk about open market operations. We have seen the central bank, the treasury bonds, TBs being sold and so on. So all these instruments work together. It's not only inflation that the government is concentrating on. There are some other instruments as well.
Now, do we expect as the government of Rwanda is stating that maybe it's going to not exceed 3.5% of the inflation in this country? Do you see this happening?
Yes, I see it happening because when you look at the global commodity prices, when you look at the prices of oil, and you look also at things to do with our increase in exports, which are projected, definitely inflation will come down.
He is mentioning about the export, and then it comes in my idea that the export of Rwanda. Do you think it's good to be continuing talking about coffee and tea, which is sometimes affected in the global market on their prices?
Well, I think we must continue talking about coffee and tea because it's what we have. And you know, my sense is that you cannot begin to make progress unless you improve what you already have. So I think, you know, as Rwanda stands today, coffee and tea is an important, you know, export component, and we must do, you know, everything that is within our means to be able to improve not just, you know, acreage under production, but actually the quality and the distribution system for the tea and coffee that we produce. But having said that, I think the point is that tea and coffee is not going to be the only thing that is going to fix our need for foreign currency, you know, in future, especially given, you know, the kind of you know, demand that we have for foreign exchange, you know, in Rwanda to finance the various development projects, you know, that the country is currently involved in. So I think, you know, all key actors and stakeholders must begin to really think about what else can we do to not only supplement, you know, the export sectors that we have today, but actually, you know, to innovate and begin to look at what else it is that can earn foreign exchange for Rwanda. And it may not necessarily be in the traditional commodities. It may very well be, you know, in the services sector. You know, I mean, there are a lot of things that perhaps you know, we can add value as a country, you know, by way of providing service to other people that may be a source of foreign exchange for Rwanda. So I think it is something that certainly will require a lot of input and a lot of discussion and action by, you know, not just government, but actually, you know, by private sector, you know, because, you know, private sector led economic growth is more sustainable. It's more longer term than you know, that which is purely government led. And I see the private sector playing a much bigger role in promoting exports than government.
Yes, Mr. Angelo. Now that we are talking about East Africa, we are talking about 4 countries instead of mentioning 5 countries. I think you should have your own. You must be having your own analysis. What is going to happen in Burundi? Because we are talking about the presentation of the budget by Minister Gatete and the other ministers from other 3 countries. But then Burundi is not mentioned. But this is not because of the current situation, because it didn't do it at the same time with others in last year, and even last year but one. So we didn't see this. What do you think is the problem with that country?
I don't know the problem. I wish them well that they also read the budget. The rest of the countries, so I cannot comment because I'm not in Burundi, but I think it's better for the East Africa to work together. They harmonize instruments, they read the budget together. So I wish them well, and I wish them to read the budget at the same time.
Yes, I addressed this question to you because you said your institution is working globally. Maybe are you in Burundi also?
Yes, we are in Burundi. We operate in Burundi. And as I speak now, we are working there. Mm-hmm. We have clients in Burundi. we assist them in filing tax returns, and we audit the banks in Burundi, insurance companies, and so on. So,
Mr. Toritich, let me come back to you in this on the same issue, because KCB is in Burundi also. How much is the effects of this current situation to this bank, and what do you think should be done for in the coming financial years to make sure that maybe your businesses are working well there, and then the country is reintegrated well in the region?
Well, I think first of all, it is important that we sympathize with the people of Burundi who are impacted by the recent crisis, and hope that the leadership of the region will continue the efforts that are being made to bring normalcy in that country. Having said that, certainly when you have skirmishes such as those, business suffers, and barring the politics alone, we have a business that is running in Burundi, and the customers that we serve in Burundi are ordinary citizens of Burundi. So when their operating environment is impacted, then the bank gets affected as well. All business gets affected. And so I think, for me, the hope is that, the genesis of the crisis in Burundi, is hopefully something that, through the collective effort of the regional leadership, to which Burundi belongs to, but obviously also through their own effort as a nation, to find a lasting solution to the peace crisis in Rwanda, rather in Burundi, so that we begin to build a political foundation that supports businesses to thrive. And I think that's really the prayer of everybody.
Finally, maybe let me ask then. According to our expectations, basing on the framework which was presented on 30th April by the Minister Gatete and the other ministers in the region, do we expect a fair budget serving this integration policies, integration song we are singing here? Do we expect the budget which is fair serving this purpose?
I'd like to believe that the budgets that are going to be read, in East Africa will reflect the aspirations and the ambitions and the desires of our leaders, because they have shown and they have led and they have driven the way, to ensuring that we have, greater integration in the region, that we actually mean business in this process. So yes, I am very optimistic that, even if it is not the big quantum, steps, towards that, but at least we begin the journey of making sure that we begin to do those things that are easy to do now, and chart the way towards greater regional integration, if not through infrastructure alone.
Mr. Mzinguzi, you agree with Mr. Toritich?
Yes, I agree, because we share common characteristics, and our budget normally hinges on our people. So when we look at, for example, regional common infrastructure projects that are being carried out or which are in progress, the budget will reflect on that. And as we indicated at the beginning, if Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda, and Burundi, for say, are concentrating on power, on agriculture, on infrastructure, the infrastructure feed each other. See? You cannot construct infrastructure in Uganda. It feeds into Rwanda, into Tanzania, and Kenya. So I see the common characteristic of the budget in the region.
So I think the common point you're mentioning here always is the infrastructure and energy, which means maybe I think you agree with each other. You talked about this before you come here, so that you say maybe the main key, the key point on this budget should be the infrastructure and the budget and then the energy. Then what do you think will happen if we don't see that location of the budget on the energy and infrastructure sectors?
I think that's a tricky one. Look, let's put it this way. I don't think for a moment, a single budget is going to be able to, to provide all the solutions that we need as a region to solve our infrastructure and power problems. But I think it is the steps, in towards actualizing that, which may well be things that we can be able to achieve in 3, 4, 5, 10, and even on a much more longer term basis. So, yes, I think I'll be very surprised if there are no actions, to actually begin to actualize the infrastructure and energy initiatives that individual countries needs to begin to put in place to be able to support the more wider regional, aspiration as far as that is concerned. But then again, even though that may not be the case to an equal degree in each of the countries, but I think the spirit and the thought process, will actually be reflected in the budget proposals.
Mr. Toritich, I really thank you very much. Maybe the final comment by Mr. Angelo on that point also. If that doesn't happen, what do you think will happen?
It will happen because, as you said, in the budget framework paper, for example, for Rwanda, infrastructure allocation is there. I have really read through the Uganda budget framework paper, Tanzania and Kenya, it's there. So it will not be a surprise. If it becomes a surprise, then another something good will happen.
Something
that
good.
Will substitute the infrastructure allocation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Angelo Musinguzi, the tax manager at the KPMG, and thank you very much, Mr. Toritich, for the managing director of KCB Rwanda. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and thank you very much, dear viewers. And I think you have your own views also. So thank you for following this program. It was a special program on pre-budget analysis. My name was Ruziga Emmanuel, and still be.